Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on Service Desk Best Practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. Now pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I'll remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me just give you a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the service desk, desktop support, and call center benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for IT service and support organizations worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the support organizations that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. For those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of our website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free premium member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are peer group benchmarks that compare your service desk or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your support organization's scope, scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there's comparability in the number of contacts handled, since IT service and support is scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop selection on the upper navigation bar, and you'll see our service desk, desktop support, and call center industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for the do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow along today on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate, share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. Now, one final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got 4 items on the agenda today, starting with a historical perspective. And although this might sound boring, I think it's very important to understand the origins of all the data that is being presented in today's Service Desk Best Practices model, and to share with you some of the industry's megatrends. This will be a real quick section because I very quickly want to move into our model for Service Desk Best Practices. It's a four-part model that addresses IT service and support strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and what we call marketing, which is really about managing your internal message to key stakeholders within your organization. Finally, I'm going to wrap up with a call to action and some specific recommendations on how you can put the information that you gain through today's webcast to immediate use so that you can see some almost instant improvements in your IT service and support organization. So let's start with our historical perspective. I've been doing this for quite a long time now, more than a quarter of a century, 27 years. And during that period of time, MetricNet has built up the largest database of IT process and performance indicators in the industry. It's a global database that contains information from more than 3,000 IT service and support benchmarks. We also have cataloged and identified more than 70 key performance indicators, everything from speed of answer, first call resolution rate, cost per contact and customer satisfaction for the service desk, and in desktop support, everything from mean time to resolve to cost per ticket. Along the way, we have also identified empirically more than 120 industry best practices. These best practices manifest themselves in service and support strategy, human resource management, process and procedure, that is ticket handling processes and procedures, in technology, in performance measurement and management, and finally in stakeholder communication. Now, what I'll be presenting today are the industry best practices for the service desk. We have a full-day seminar that addresses this. However, today, since we don't have a full day, I'll be boiling that down to the most important elements and limiting our time here to just 90 minutes and sharing with you during those 90 minutes what we have observed empirically to be the industry's best demonstrated practices. Now, throughout today's presentation, you're going to hear me refer to best practices and world-class performance. So it makes sense for me to define right up front what a world-class service desk is. There's four elements of this definition. The first is this: you consistently exceed customer expectations. When you do that, you will see high levels of customer satisfaction. And for those of you, which is most of you, who are tracking call quality, you will see that your call quality is also consistently high. Okay, so high quality is the first component. Second component is that your costs are managed at or below industry average levels. You see, it's not good enough to just deliver high quality. You also have to manage your costs effectively. You've got to be efficient. So we look at your cost per contact to see if that's below average, and we look to see if you are engaged in practices that enable you to minimize your total cost of ownership in IT service and support. That theme will pervade today's presentation, the idea that you can get it done at level 1. It's a lot less expensive to resolve a ticket at level 1 than it is to resolve a ticket at desktop support, as an example. So understanding that and putting that concept into practice is an important part of managing your costs. Thirdly, and more subjectively, the service desk follows industry best practices. And again, what I'm presenting today is an abbreviated version of a full-day workshop that we have on service desk best practices. We try to boil down the most important components of that into a 90-minute presentation. Now, the good news is that the industry best practices are pretty well defined and documented at this point, which means that you don't have to go out there and reinvent the wheel. You don't have to learn them through trial and error. You don't have to improve incrementally. You can build upon the industry's proven best practices, knowing with confidence that those best practices are pretty well established and identified at this point. We like to see that world-class organizations are following those best practices, of course, and then finally, and most subjectively, you're adding value on every transaction. What does that mean? Well, it means that your customers have a positive experience every time they interact with IT service and support, and this in turn drives a positive view of IT overall. Now, this will be another major theme that pervades today's discussion and presentation, is the idea that service and support is the gateway to IT for almost all end users. And as a result, you have a special opportunity as well as a special responsibility there to drive a positive view of service and support, which translates by proxy into a positive view of IT overall. Now graphically, when we define what a world-class support organization is, it looks like this. On this chart, we have two dimensions. We've got cost per contact on the x-axis, higher cost on the right, lower cost on the left, and we've got quality as measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now when we take the data points from MetricNet's benchmarking database and we put them on this two-dimensional chart, the locus of points looks something like this. These little blue circles here represent data points. They are bounded on the top by what we call the best-in-class performance curve, and they are bounded on the bottom by what we call the average performance curve. Now there's several things that we can ascertain and interpret from this particular chart. The first one being that the relationship is cause and effect. Typically, it's cost that drives quality because, as you know, if you've worked in this industry for very long at all, typically you are resource constrained, meaning that you are constrained in the headcount and the technology and the dollars, et cetera, that you have. And so the cost, your budget, if you will drive the level of quality that you can deliver within the organization. And it is a true cause and effect relationship. So cost will drive the level of quality. One implication of that is that when individuals contact us and ask us, what does it mean to be a world-class service desk? Do I have to have an abandonment rate of 2%, a speed of answer of 15 seconds, a customer satisfaction of 95%, and a cost per contact under $20? The answer is, I don't know, but if you tell me how much you have at your disposal and what you're trying to support, what you have at your disposal, meaning what your budget and headcount is, I can tell you what level of quality that you can potentially achieve. So if you're down here and you're resourced at $10 per contact, there's only going to be a certain level of quality that you can deliver at $10 per contact. By contrast, if your resourcing is such that you can spend $50, $60, $70 per contact, you would be expected to achieve a much higher level of absolute quality as measured by customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, first level resolution rate, and a handful of other metrics. So we've got a cause and effect relationship here. We know that being world-class is a relative concept relative to the resources that you have at your disposal, and we know that the relationship is non-linear, as you can see here. And what that says is that as you improve and increase the quality of service that you deliver, the cost will increase disproportionately. That's nothing more than diminishing returns, and you see it every day, whether it's in buying an automobile, buying a house, buying a first-class ticket on an airplane, or anything else. As quality improves, cost and price typically improve or increase disproportionately, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, it's helpful to understand that because we have worked with organizations that were spending, in our opinion, probably way too much on service and support. And when that happens, oftentimes you have an opportunity to reduce your costs fairly dramatically without reducing your quality much at all. By contrast, we have worked with organizations that are very and extremely limited on the resources that they have at their disposal. And just a little infusion of resources, that is not increasing the budget much at all, can result in a huge improvement in the quality of service offered. Now, most organizations tend to operate up here in this midpoint. For those of you who remember calculus, if you were to take the first derivative of this curve and set it to 1, that would be this point right here where you have a 45-degree angle where you're roughly in equilibrium. That is where cost and quality get equal play, if you will. They are always going to be in tension. If you pursue quality or zero defects or 100% customer satisfaction, you're going to be a very, very high-cost support organization. By contrast, if you pursue the lowest possible cost that you possibly can, your quality is going to be quite low. So most support organizations tend to end up in this middle ground here, striking a reasonable balance between cost and quality. But the main point I want you to take away from this is that there is no absolute definition of what a world-class service and support organization is. It's really dependent upon the resources you have at your disposal. And that brings us to the first polling question of the day. As you can imagine, that polling question has to do with world-class performance. And here's the polling question. Do you consider your service desk to be world-class, given the definition that I've just provided you? Remember, there's 4 components of that definition. Your costs are below average, your customer satisfaction is above average, you're following industry best practices, and you're delivering value on every single transaction. So we'll give you a few seconds to weigh in on that. We like to get 90% participation if possible on these, and we're already up to about 70%. While you're answering that, let me just say thank you to those of you who are dialing in from around the world. We've got more than 20 countries represented on today's webcast. Some of you are in very inconvenient time zones: Australia, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia. We've got quite a few people on today's webcast dialing in live from those countries. It's the middle of the night your time. It's quite an honor to have you here. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining today's webcast. Okay, if you haven't weighed in yet on this question, do you consider your service desk to be world-class? Please do so. We're going to go ahead and close that poll down and then share those results with you. Okay, based upon the definitions that I've just provided, just under a third, 28%, do believe that your service desk is world-class. Another nearly two-thirds, 61%, say no, and then 11% not applicable, presumably because you're not directly affiliated with a service and support organization. So for those of you who answered yes, congratulations on this achievement. It's no small achievement. For those who have answered no to this question, let me just offer a few words of encouragement, which are these. Over the course of the next hour or so, what we're going to be doing is trying to highlight, if you will, the path that needs to be taken for a service and support organization to achieve world-class performance. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing difficult about it. You simply have to know what the path is, and you have to follow that path. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't cost a lot of money. So take heart, for those of you who answered no to this question, because achieving world-class performance is a relatively straightforward, relatively low-cost, relatively quick proposition. Okay, let me go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion. And specifically, we're going to switch gears at this point, and I'm going to introduce for you our model for service desk best practices. There's 4 components of this model. We look at service and support strategy. We look at performance metrics and the discipline of performance measurement and management. We look at human resource management, and then we look at what I call marketing, which is really about actively managing stakeholder perceptions. Now, when we put these 4 things together, it's a very simple model, but it does reflect empirically what goes on in the industry. You see, every time MetricNet does a benchmark, when we find an organization that is consistently exceeding customer expectations, does have low cost, is following industry best practices, and is adding value on every single transaction, we simply ask ourselves, what are they doing and what do they have in common with other world-class support organizations? And it turns out that this very simple model actually explains very well what they're doing. You'll notice that these 4 components are connected. It is a continuous process, and each component reinforces and fortifies every other component in the model. So it's synergistic in this sense. You don't have to be world-class in any of these 4 areas to have a world-class service desk, but you have to at least be above average in each of these 4 areas in order to have a world-class service and support function. That's the beauty of the synergy here, is that if you're just above average in each of these 4 areas, you will have a world-class service and support function. However, if you're doing outstandingly well in 3 of the 4 areas and you're weak in 1 of the 4 areas, you will not have a world-class service and support organization. So don't strive for perfection in any one of these areas. Simply strive for being above average in each of the 4 areas, and you will achieve world-class performance. Now, you will note that these 4 elements of our best practices model are all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. We believe that customer satisfaction is a losing proposition because satisfied customers are not necessarily loyal customers. They're not necessarily going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals about the support organization, and they're not necessarily loyal to this channel. But enthusiastic customers are going to be loyal. They are going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals, and they are going to choose to do business with your service and support organization, whether they're internal captive customers or external customers of, say, a BPO, a business process outsourcer. So our goal here in this best practices model is to drive customer enthusiasm, customer loyalty, positive word-of-mouth referrals, and repeat business, if you will. Now, very briefly, strategy deals with creating economic value in IT service and support. This is a foreign concept to many organizations who historically have viewed service and support as nothing more than a necessary evil or a keep the lights on function or a cost center, but certainly not something that creates economic value. I'm going to hopefully put that myth to rest today and demonstrate at least 3 ways that IT service and support drives and creates demonstrable economic value in IT service and support. Metrics is about the holistic use of performance indicators, not just to track and trend your performance, but to use those metrics diagnostically and prescriptively in order to continuously improve your performance. Human resource management is about managing your human resources over the complete life cycle, everything from identification and recruitment and training to outplacement or moving those individuals on to other positions within the organization. And marketing, as I've mentioned earlier, a bit of a misnomer, but this really refers to the fact that you need to actively manage your internal messaging, and you need to actively manage shareholder perceptions, because the old adage in the industry is expectations not set are expectations not met. That's very true. So you have to actively establish and set stakeholder expectations in order to meet and exceed those stakeholder expectations. We're going to start our discussion here with strategy, creating economic value in IT service and support. And the first slide might seem a little bit peculiar. I want to talk about what I call the paradox of IT support and then explain how this relates to the creation of economic value. If you look at IT organizations worldwide, only about 4% of their spending is dedicated to end-user support. I define that as being level 1 service desk and desktop support. At MetricNet, we refer to that as level 2 support. Your vernacular may be different, but we're talking about 4% of IT dollars worldwide being spent on level 1 support and desktop support. The other 96% is spent on things like application development and maintenance, network operations, mainframe and mid-range computing, desktop computing, cloud computing, contract services like disaster recovery. Now, unfortunately, when service and support occupies a 4% line item on a budget, many unfortunately erroneously assume that there's very little upside opportunity in IT support. After all, if you're only spending 4% of your resources here, how much can we do? Can we squeeze another % out of it and turn it into a 3% line item? Can we cut it in half and turn it into a 2% line item? That's the thinking that pervades the industry, unfortunately. And the result is that most service and support organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing costs. Yet, we've been able to demonstrate through our ROI methodology that the most effective support strategies focus on maximizing value and specifically on creating economic value. Let me show you how that's done. First of all, IT service and support has an opportunity to minimize total cost of ownership in IT service and support. If you look at level 1, last year in North America, the fully loaded cost of resolving a ticket at level 1 in the service desk was about $22. This is all costs, not just your personnel costs, but also your travel, your training, your telecommunications, your technology expense, your office supplies, your facilities expense. So you look at all personnel, salaries and benefits, not just for the agents, but also for the indirect supervisors, team leads, managers, trainers, workforce schedulers, and the like, as well as all the indirect expenses. You add it all up, divide it by the total inbound contact volume, and you're looking at, total ticket volume, and you're looking at about $22 per ticket. Again, 2013 North America. Now, if you push that ticket out to desktop support, the cost of resolution, again, fully loaded cost of resolution, is on average about $62. If you get another level of IT involved, we call it level 3 IT, application groups, NOC, networking, etc. On average, the cost of resolution is about $85. For field support, you jump in a truck, or you get in a golf cart or a car, you drive somewhere to resolve the problem. On average, about $200 a ticket. And when the vendor's involved, it's on average $500 a ticket, and I'm surprised it's that low. It seems like it should be higher than that. But I think you can see very easily from this that the lower on this hierarchy that you can resolve tickets, the better off you are, which is why the expression in the industry, get it done at level 1, is not just a catchphrase. There's real economic value in this idea that the more you resolve at level 1, the lower your cost of ownership is going to be. In fact, many of you have probably heard of the concept called shift left. And that's what's being illustrated here, although I've got the diagram tilted in the wrong direction. If I rotate this 90 degrees to the right, you can see what shift left means. If I shift a ticket from level 2 desktop support to level 1, shift left 1 level, the cost drops from $62 to $22. Now, we know, of course, that not all tickets can be resolved at level 1. There are some tickets, for example, hardware break fixes that can't be done remotely. move ads and changes cannot be done remotely. Virtual move ads and changes can, but if you're talking about a physical move ad change, that cannot be done remotely. So there are some things that have to be done at level 2, some things that have to be done at level 3 and at field support and by the vendor. I'm not suggesting that those tickets will ever drop to 0. That's not going to happen. But what I am suggesting is that if you're resolving things at level 2 that could and should be resolved at level 1, and if you're resolving things at level 3 or field support or vendor support that could be resolved at desktop support or level 1, you're wasting money. Now there's a metric in desktop support called % resolved level 1 capable, which measures the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved by the service desk. It turns out that number is more than 20% worldwide. That's a lot of tickets to be resolved at desktop support that could and should have been resolved by the service desk, and those are very, very costly defects. So understanding this from whether you're in desktop support or the service desk, understanding this hierarchy, if you will, and understanding that the further down you can push the ticket and get it resolved, the better off you are. There are actually 2 levels below this. Level 0 is user self-help, self-service, and level -1 is when you eliminate a problem altogether through root cause analysis or by training employees effectively so that they simply do not have that problem. So level 0 is user self-help. Level -1 means that the problem just goes away altogether, and that's the best of all, meaning that the problem simply doesn't exist. Now, there's a related concept within level 1, which is this idea of driving contacts into lower cost channels. What I'm showing here on page 16 is actual data from a client of MetricNet's showing how over a 5-year period they took their volume, which was mostly voice volume, that's the dark blue line here, mostly live agent calls, and nearly 20% email calls, and they managed to drive the mix to a much lower cost level. When they started this process, their cost per ticket was about $35. 5 years into it, which was 2013 last year, their cost per ticket was about $14. So they had cut their cost per ticket by more than half by driving volume through the lower cost channels, particularly web self-service and web chat. Web self-service is the lowest cost channel. And you have to be careful about that because you don't want, for example, a highly paid executive or scientist, R&D person, professional person spending an inordinate amount of time trying to resolve their own problem, i.e. level 0. However, there's a certain class of tickets, a certain class of incidents that can and should be self-resolved. And the more you can drive into that channel, the better off you are. You're going to create a more favorable cost mix, which is what is being shown here. So this is a little bit different than the concept of minimizing total cost of ownership. Minimizing TCO means you get it done at level 1 whenever possible. This suggests that within level 1, what you want to try and do over time is create a channel mix that gets lower cost because you're driving more volume into the chat channel, which tends on average to be about 65 to 70% of the cost of a live agent contact. Email and live agent, depending upon the organization you're in, sometimes an email ticket is more expensive than a live agent. Sometimes an email ticket is less expensive than a live agent. It really depends on a lot of things, including your workflow. So there's kind of a tie, if you will, for first place for being the most expensive, whether it's email or live agent. But we know for sure that web chat is on average about 65 to 70% of the cost of a live agent or email ticket. An IVR resolved, for example, user-enabled password reset, is even lower cost. And then web self-service, there's no marginal cost, no variable cost, if you will, that shows up in the service desk, but you do have a hidden cost. That is the cost associated with the end user that resolves that particular ticket or problem by himself or herself. Now, the third source of value is this. This is based upon a study that MetricNet did a couple of years ago. We had 60 support organizations participate in this particular study. We benchmarked both their service desk and their desktop support, and the goal was to try and understand whether or not the quality of support impacted end user productivity. Well, you would know instinctively, I believe, that yes, of course it does, because the average knowledge worker today has almost 3 devices. We're talking about laptop computers, desktop computers, printers, smartphones. Some of our clients even have printers and servers in their offices. But the average knowledge worker has almost 3 devices now. And when those devices malfunction or they don't work properly, or they lose a password, or the software is broken and it's not working the way it should, the hardware needs to be refreshed, whatever it might be. These create sometimes complete outages for the end user where they can't get any work done. More often than not, there's a workaround, and so they can still get work done, but their productivity is impeded. And we hypothesized at the beginning of this particular study that those service and support organizations that performed more effectively on the benchmark were likely to return more productive hours to their end users. And that's pretty much what this data says. So by organizing these 60 companies into 4 quadrants of 15 support organizations each, we've got the top quartile for service desk and desktop support, the second quartile for service desk and desktop support, third quartile, and fourth quartile. Now, end users within these organizations were asked to participate in a 1-month experiment. They were asked every time to keep track of their lost productivity every time there was some issue with one of their IT devices, whether it was a smartphone, a printer, a desktop computer, a laptop computer, a tablet computer, or anything else. We simply said, keep track of how much time you lose. Sometimes it's obvious. If your computer's broken and you're out of business for 24 hours, then you've probably lost a full productive day. More often than not, it requires some estimation because, as I mentioned earlier, there might be a workaround that impedes your progress for a short period of time, but it doesn't completely put you out of business. So what these individuals did is they kept track of how much time they lost over the course of a month as a result of these IT-related issues, hardware problems, software problems, and the like. And here was the interesting conclusion. If you are lucky enough to work in an organization, big company that has top quartile service and support, on average, over the course of a year, you're going to lose about 17 productive hours as a result of these IT-related issues. If you are unlucky enough to work in a company that has fourth quartile IT service and support, you're going to lose about 47 productive hours a year. That's more than a full week of productivity. So the difference here between a top quartile service and support organization and a bottom quartile service and support organization is about 30 productive hours per year. That's about 4 full days. So when you're talking about ROI of IT service and support, the return on investment for IT service and support, this is the biggest contributor to, this is the biggest economic contributor to IT service and support, is the ability to return productive hours to end users. Let me finish this slide by explaining what I've got on the top half here. These are data points. Each of these stacks represents 15 data records, blue diamonds. In quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, and quartile 4, the red line is a linear regression that runs through that data. And over here on the left-hand side, we've got the number of productive hours lost per employee per year. You can see that as the quality of service and support diminishes or deteriorates, as it becomes worse, the number of productive hours lost by end users increases fairly dramatically. It goes from 17 hours if you're in the top quartile performing company all the way up to about 47 hours if you work in one of these fourth quartile performing companies. This is huge, and this is one of the biggest single contributors to economic value in IT service and support. And it's important to understand this because IT service and support is not a passive activity. It's not a keep the lights on function. It's not a necessary evil. It's something that creates and drives real economic value for the enterprise. Now, the fourth source of leverage that you need to understand is not necessarily economic leverage, but this is an important one to understand, particularly for the CIOs that we've got on the call today, which very quickly going through the roster of those that signed up for today's webcast. We've got somewhere in the range of 20 to 22 CIOs on the call today. We've also got a number of chief technology officers and senior managers within IT. This slide is particularly important for all of you, but I want everybody to understand what this is all about. This was based on a survey that MetricNet completed a couple of years ago. There were more than 1,000 large cap companies that participated in this survey. It was a multiple choice survey, and we simply contacted IT organizations within these companies, and we asked them if we could add a question to their IT customer satisfaction survey. So most IT groups within large corporations do survey their customers at least once a year to find out what they think of IT services. And we simply inserted one of our questions. That question had to do with what drives those end users' views of all of IT. We didn't ask them about service and support. We simply said, what drives your view of corporate IT? It was a multiple choice question. We gave them, believe it or not, about 25 choices, and we told them to pick their top 3, which is why when you add up these numbers, it adds to more than 100%. And here was the profound conclusion. 84% of those that participated in this survey said that the service desk drives their view of corporate IT. Another 47% said that desktop support drives their opinion of corporate IT. Now that makes sense if you think about it, because most end users don't have much interaction with, say, the NOC, or those that work in the data center, or those that work in application maintenance and development, but they do have frequent interactions with service and support. On average, end users worldwide call the service desk twice a month. That number ranges from a low of about 0.5 calls per user per month to about 5 or 6 calls per user per month, but the average worldwide is about 2 calls per user per month to the service desk. And for desktop support, it's about 1 ticket every other month, so a half a ticket per month per end user. So frequent interactions between end users and IT service and support represent an opportunity for IT service and support to drive a positive view for all of IT. Remember, the question wasn't, what do you think of service and support? The question was, what do you think of all of IT and what drives that perception? The number one answer was the service desk. The second most common answer was desktop support. So to get back to a point I made a little bit earlier in this presentation, for those of you who have made this your profession, for those of you who work in IT service and support, you have a special opportunity as well as a special responsibility, because you are the gateway to IT for almost all end users. And what you do has far-reaching implications, not just for service and support, but it has far-reaching implications for all of IT. Service and support, in fact, is a proxy for all of IT. And by proxy, this is an indication of how good a job the leadership in IT is doing. If service and support is doing a good job, end users are going to think that all of IT is doing a good job. So service and support becomes a proxy for all of IT. It's the face of IT, and it is the ambassador, if you will, for IT. If you're doing a good job here, end users are going to think positive things about all of IT, and by proxy, they're going to think positive things about IT leadership as well. Let's move on now. We talked about creating economic value in IT service and support, and if you understand that leverage and exploit that leverage, you can move your service desk from its historic support role in the organization to a strategic source of competitive advantage, one that creates economic value for the enterprise overall, and one that drives a positive view of IT for all end users. Now we want to turn our attention to key performance indicators. And the reason we've broken this out as a separate section within our best practices model is because we have found that there is an approximate or rough one-to-one correlation between service and support organizations that have a mature metrics discipline and those that are world-class. In other words, we don't believe you can become world-class unless you have a mature metrics discipline. By contrast, if you're not mature with your performance indicators, if you're not using them diagnostically and prescriptively, it's almost impossible to become world-class. So this section will be the densest, if you will, the most in-depth section of our model. We've done that for a reason, the reason I've just outlined, which is that more than any other set of success factors, having a mature performance measurement and management discipline is the key to achieving world-class performance. Now on page 20, what I've shown here are some of the most common service desk key performance indicators. We've broken them into 6 categories. We've got cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics. We've got agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling metrics. But I don't want to lead you to believe that this is an all-inclusive list. I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of key performance indicators that I have seen in this industry. But these, the 25 KPIs shown on page 20, are the most common. Now, we've all heard this expression. If you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. And there are variations on that theme, such as what gets measured gets treasured. The whole idea is that if you're not measuring it, you really aren't managing it. But there's a lot more to the story. Most support organizations collect a lot of data, but they don't do much with that data. In other words, they're using metrics very passively, like a microscope in an experiment. When you look at something under a microscope, your intent typically is not to disturb whatever it is, whether you're doing a biological experiment or a physical experiment. What you're trying to do is observe something through that microscope. Unfortunately, too often, KPIs in service and support are used in the same way. They're used to observe performance, but not to act on that performance. In other words, they're used very passively. But what we want to promote here is what I call the holistic use of key performance indicators, where instead of just gathering a lot of data and doing almost no analysis and gaining very little insight and taking no action, we want to turn the historical approach upside down and promote what we call the holistic use of key performance indicators. So historically, service and support organizations gathered a lot of metrics. They did a little bit of analysis. They may have done some action planning, but by the time they got down to where the rubber meets the road, actually doing something with those measurements, there wasn't much happening. But the value increases as you move up this pyramid. That's what this arrow here is showing. And so what has emerged over the last 3 to 5 years is a very different approach to key performance measurement and management, an approach that minimizes the importance of measurement, but increases the importance of the analysis that goes on behind those measures, the action planning that results from the analysis, and the actions themselves that result from the action planning. This is where the rubber meets the road. And unless your measurements inform intelligent actions by your management, intelligent decision-making that enables you to improve the quality of service and support over time and contain your costs effectively, measurement is kind of a worthless activity. Measures are interesting, they tell you something, but unless you're willing to act on them through analysis, action planning, and then action itself, you're not gaining any advantage at all from your performance measurement and management. So what we want to do is promote this idea of measurement as an active discipline, not as a passive activity where you're simply putting together the charts every month, creating the reports every month, and saying, look at that, our cost per contact's down, or our first contact resolution rate is up, or our speed of answer is higher this month than it was last month. Well, what does it mean, and what are you going to do about it? Those are the more important questions, and that's what the holistic approach to key performance measurement and management is all about. So when we go back to this list of 25 KPIs, what I want to suggest is that less is more when it comes to key performance indicators. And specifically, the 80-20 rule as applied to KPIs is really summarized here on page 25. The metrics that really matter are these: cost per contact, customer satisfaction. These are your efficiency and effectiveness metrics. We call them the foundation metrics because everything you do in IT service and support boils down to either containing your costs or trying to drive a higher quality customer experience. Nothing else matters. And I know that sounds very draconian, but if you think about it for a few minutes, I think you'll come to the same conclusion. In service and support, and almost any other service organization for that matter, the only two things that matter are your cost and your customer satisfaction. And effective management means that you are continually either containing or reducing your costs, or you're continually trying to improve the quality of the customer experience. Now, viewed through that lens, that greatly simplifies managerial decision-making, because any decision you make, whether it's headcount or technology, approval of some project, organizational, whatever it might be, subjected to these two tests. Will this, in the long run, reduce or contain our costs? Or will this, in the long run, improve the quality of the customer experience? If the answer to one or both of those questions is not yes, then you just don't do it. It's as simple as that. Everything you do in service and support, from the training class that you're going to introduce to increase the first level and first contact resolution rate, to the beer bash on a Friday afternoon, if it doesn't have the long-term effect of containing your costs or improving the quality of the customer experience, you simply don't do it. Now, when we do benchmarks, if we find that an organization's costs are high or their customer satisfaction is low, I can't go out there and just, tweak cost per contact. And I can't go out there and just crank up the customer satisfaction. It doesn't work that way. But what I do have control over are the underlying drivers of cost, the big one being agent utilization, and the underlying drivers of customer satisfaction, the big one being first contact resolution rate. These are the levers that you have at your disposal to drive costs lower and to improve the quality of the customer experience. So these are the underlying drivers. Productivity drives your cost. This first contact resolution rate metric drives your customer satisfaction. Now, we've included in here first level resolution rate. Why? Well, I explained that a little bit earlier when we looked at this chart here. First level resolution rate is a proxy for total cost of ownership in IT service and support. And so you want to include a first level resolution rate metric to give you an indication of how good a job you are doing in minimizing TCO in IT service and support. Now, on the short list of metrics, we include agent job satisfaction. Some people are surprised by that. They're like, well, we understand it's important to maintain morale. We understand it's important to manage job satisfaction within the workplace, but why would you include agent job satisfaction on the short list of the metrics that really matter? Well, the answer is that agent job satisfaction is a bellwether metric, and it has far-reaching implications in IT service and support. It has a ripple effect throughout the organization. High job satisfaction is correlated with high customer satisfaction. High job satisfaction is correlated with lower handle times and lower cost per contact. High job satisfaction is correlated with low absenteeism and low turnover. Those are both good things. Turnover is costly, absenteeism is costly. So agent job satisfaction really has at least a secondary effect on a lot of other metrics in IT service and support. And for that reason, it's an important metric not just to track, but it's an important metric to manage. In fact, all of these metrics can and should be managed. That's what the holistic use of key performance indicators is all about. Not just tracking and trending your performance, but using them proactively, using the metrics proactively and managing them so that you can drive higher levels of performance, which ultimately translate into either lower costs or higher customer satisfaction. Finally, the balanced scorecard is what we call an aggregate metric because it rolls together all of these metrics that I've shown here into a single overall measure of service desk performance. The reason this is important is because you've got a lot of moving parts in the service desk. And if you go to even an experienced person and you say, hey, my cost per ticket was down last month, but customer satisfaction was also down, but FCR was up, etc., the question very quickly becomes, well, what does it all mean? And are you doing better this month than you were last month? Are you doing better this quarter than you were last quarter? Are you doing better this year than you were last year? The balanced scorecard is a very elegant solution that enables you to answer that question. Let me explain how this is constructed. First of all, we select the metrics to include in the scorecard. For this example, we picked the 6 metrics that we believe to be the most important. We've got cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, which drives cost, first contact res rate, which drives your CSAT, customer satisfaction, agent job satisfaction, and then ASA. I don't care much for ASA as a metric, but everybody in the world tracks that metric, so we include it in the scorecard, even though it doesn't have a strong impact on either cost or quality. Now, the next thing we do is we weight each of these metrics according to their relative importance. Now, you can see that we've overweighted cost and customer satisfaction. Collectively, they get 50% of the weight. We've done that. Why? Because those are the foundation metrics. And remember, everything boils down to either cost containment or driving a higher quality customer experience. Then we give agent utilization and first contact resolution rate 15% each. And finally, job satisfaction and ASA get 10% each. The next thing you do in the construction of your scorecard is you put a representative range for a comparable peer group here. Now, this is important. Comparable peer group means that you're comparing yourself to other support organizations that do similar things to you and are operating in a similar geography. So scope, scale, complexity, geography need to be roughly the same here. If you're a service desk that does nothing but Microsoft Office support, your handle times are 5-6 minutes long, you're not going to want to compare yourself to a service desk that does support of proprietary business applications and has a handle time of 35 to 40 minutes as an example. So it's important when you select these ranges here to select them from a peer group of support organizations. We do this every time we do a benchmark, but you need to select ranges here that are indicative of what you might find in a peer group of similar support desks to your own. So this represents worst case and best case performance for each one of the 6 metrics included in the scorecard. The next step, third column from the right, is to show your own performance. So in this particular case, the service desk is spending $21.83 per contact. Their customer satisfaction is 77.2%, and so on. The next step, second column from the right, is to calculate a metric score. Now, we use an interpolation formula here, and that formula is we take the worst case in the comparison group, we subtract your actual performance, that becomes the numerator of our ratio. The denominator of the ratio is the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. And you're going to end up with a metric score that ranges from 0 to 100%. If you're at 0, it means you have the worst case performance in the comparison group. If you're at 100%, it means you have the best case performance in the comparison group. So high scores here are good. This $21.83 cost per contact is much closer to the best end of the spectrum than the worst end of the spectrum, which is why the score is 72%. By contrast, the low scores we've got here on customer satisfaction at 39.9% is an indication that this 77.2% CSAT is much closer to the worst end of the spectrum than it is to the best end of the spectrum. So again, the metric score will range between 0 and 100% depending upon how close you are to the worst case or how close you are to the best case. 100% means that you have the best score in the comparison group. 0% means that you have the worst score in the comparison group. Final step in the construction of the scorecard is to multiply each metric score by its respective weighting. You come up with a balanced score in the far right column for each of the 6 metrics, and when you add those together, you're going to come up with a number between 0 and 100%. Now, the first time you do this and you look at it and you say, well, 55.6%, what does that mean? What do I do with it? Well, the first time you do it, it isn't terribly meaningful, but it does become very meaningful when you compare it to other support organizations. It's a great equalizer and a great normalizer. 55.6% is the orange bar represented here. That's the number that we just calculated back here. You can see that it's an above average performance. The average for this peer group was slightly more than 50%. In fact, when we run hundreds of support organizations through this algorithm, the average score is about 50%. And you've got tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left below 30%. And it's a nice bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution. So the mean, the average is at 50%. Those that are in the top quartile are typically at 60% or above, second quartile from 50 to 60%, third quartile from 40 to 50%, and fourth quartile below 40%. That's typically the way the distribution of points looks. So anything over 50% is pretty good, but the bigger question is, how does your performance move over time? In other words, if you're updating this monthly or quarterly, what you want to see is a progression such as what I've shown here. This is data from 2012 from one of our service desk clients. You can see that they updated their scorecard once a month. They started the year at just under 60%. They ended the year at just under 80%. The purple background here represents the trailing 12-month average. So you can see that over time, by updating their scorecard, they were able to demonstrate that their performance did improve over time. Now, if you think about it, what we've done here is we've aggregated a disparate set of metrics, some with units of dollars, some with units of percent, some with units of seconds. We've normalized those. We've rolled them together. We've created a single overall measure of your performance. That can be used to compare to other service desks on a fair, level playing field, and it can be used to track and trend your performance over time. So at this point, we've got 6 metrics left on our short list of metrics, and we're going to use a benchmarking case study to go through those remaining metrics. Now, benchmarking, most of you are probably familiar with it, but it involves comparing your service desk to the performance of a peer group of service desks. Now, the peer group has to be selected carefully. I've already alluded to this. You want comparability in scope of services offered, scale, meaning volume, because this is a scale-sensitive function, scope, scale, complexity. Good proxy for complexity is handle time. And then geography. This is a labor-intensive function. And if you're a service desk in India, you don't want to compare to a service desk in the UK or the United States, for example. Likewise, if you're a service desk in Canada, you don't want to compare yourself to a service desk in the Philippines or Indonesia, for example. The wage rates are very different in those parts of the world, and for that reason, you want to be comparing to service desks that are within your geographic area, typically within your country, sometimes within a geographic region, for example, Western Europe, North America, Latin America, as an example. But the first part of benchmarking involves comparing your service desk to the peer group and then asking yourself where there are performance gaps, whether it's in cost, customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, or anything else. Why is it that these other service desks, some of them anyway, are able to achieve a better result? You see, if you understand how the peer group gets to a better first contact resolution rate, a higher customer satisfaction, a lower abandonment rate, a higher customer satisfaction, whatever it might be, you can selectively emulate what they are doing in order to achieve a better result. You see, given enough time, any service desk can achieve world-class performance. The question is, are you going to get there incrementally through trial and error at an evolutionary pace, or are you going to build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers and improve not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace? That's the real value of benchmarking, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve incrementally through trial and error. You can leapfrog ahead of all that and build upon the industry's proven best practices and achieve world-class performance at a revolutionary pace. So that brings us to our second set of polling questions. We've actually got two polling questions closely related. Both of those polling questions are about benchmarking, so let me open up the next polling question, and here's the question. Have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? Benchmarked your service desk within the past year. Okay, we're getting a lot of good participation. While you're voting on that, I just want to shout out a few names here. These are selected randomly. I'm just going through the list. Anna Souza, thanks for joining us today. Great to see you here. Court Sampson, great to see you. Doris Mitri, glad you could join us today. Marcella Best, great to have you here. Rod Beltran, glad you could join us today. Sergio Uran, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thanks for joining us. Shelley Dunayer, thanks for joining us today. Suzanne Karsvang, thanks for joining us today. Okay, we've got almost 90% who have voted on this particular poll. If you haven't voted, please do so. I'll go ahead and share those results with you now. Okay, have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? 19% of you have. You've answered yes. 66% no, and then 15% not applicable, again, presumably because you're not affiliated with a service and support organization. For those that have benchmarked within the past year, kudos. We have found, in addition to there being a one-to-one correlation between a mature metrics discipline and world-class performance, there is approximately the same ratio, that is a one-to-one correlation between those organizations that benchmark at least once a year and those organizations that do achieve world-class performance. Now, some organizations are world-class because they benchmark. Some organizations benchmark because they are world-class. So I'm not sure what the chicken or egg, which came first, the benchmark or the world-class performance. We found both situations. We found, again, world-class organizations that got there through benchmarking, and we found world-class organizations that stay there as a result of benchmarking. So for those of you who have not benchmarked in the past, let me just offer some words of encouragement, much like I did earlier, which is this. Benchmarking, because it is probably the single most effective investment that you can make in your service organization in terms of time and money, a relatively modest investment can enable you to leapfrog ahead of what I mentioned earlier, all the blood, sweat, and tears associated with incremental trial and error improvement, and achieve world-class performance at a revolutionary pace. I would ask you, if you haven't benchmarked in the past or you've not benchmarked in the past year, to consider doing so. I think you will find the investment well worth the benefit. So what I'm going to do now is open the final polling question of the day, and it's related to the last polling question. And the polling question is this: do you plan to benchmark your service desk in the future? And there are 5 possible answers here. Yes, within the next 90 days. Yes, within the next 6 months. Yes, within the next year. No, or not applicable if you're not affiliated with a service and support organization. So next 90 days, next 6 months, next year, not at all, or not applicable. Okay, we've got about 80% now who have weighed in on this question. If you haven't answered the polling question, please do so. Do you plan to benchmark your service and support desk in the future? You've got 5 choices here. Okay, let me go ahead and close that poll down, and then I'll share the results with you. And here's what we've got. 14% of you are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Another 20% are planning to benchmark their service desk within the next 6 months. Another third, 33%, within the next year, and 9% are not planning to benchmark at this time. So again, I want to encourage those of you that are planning to benchmark, which is, let's see, 34 plus 33, 67% of you, 2/3 of those who responded to this survey, and almost 90% of you responded, 2/3 of you are planning to benchmark within the next year. That's probably one of the best results we've ever seen in delivering this webcast. So I want to encourage you, those who have plans to benchmark in the future, whether it's the next 90 days, the next 6 months, or the next year, I would encourage you to go through with those plans, to persevere, make the investment of time and effort that's necessary to benchmark your support organization, because a high-quality benchmark will show you exactly what you need to do in order to sort of short-circuit the path to world-class performance, get there with a minimum amount of time and effort. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our discussion of industry best practices. And what I'm showing here on page 33 is benchmarking data from approximately, I believe there are about 40 companies in this benchmarking peer group. And the first thing I do when I'm conducting a benchmark is I look at the two foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. Now for this particular peer group, you can see that the cost per contact at $28.17 was quite a bit higher than the benchmarking peer group. That is, the company that did this benchmark, they were spending $28 per contact. The peer group was spending about $23 per contact. So there's our first red flag. We've got high costs. Our second red flag is down here. Customer satisfaction at 63% is quite a bit below the peer group average of 79%. So we've got two big red flags here. High cost, low customer satisfaction. And in the process of explaining the other metrics that were on the short list of KPIs that I shared with you a little bit earlier, we're going to go through a benchmarking case study. And I'm going to show you how benchmarking enables an organization to diagnose the underlying causes of performance gaps and then develop action plans that enable them to close those performance gaps. So let's start with our foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. You can think of them as lying on a two-dimensional chart. We've got cost per contact here on the x-axis. We've got customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now the x-axis is somewhat counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the left, not higher cost. So as you move right, this represents lower cost. As you go to the left, that's higher cost. The y-axis is as you would expect. As you go higher on the y-axis, you have higher levels of customer satisfaction. Now the horizontal line that runs across here represents the average customer satisfaction for this peer group of roughly 100 organizations. The vertical line that runs through here represents the average cost per contact, again, for this group of roughly 100 service desks in this particular example. The white diamonds here represent data points. Ideally, you want to be in this upper right-hand quadrant. This is the quadrant where you are both efficient, meaning low cost, and effective, meaning high quality or high customer satisfaction. If you're in this lower right quadrant, it says that your costs are low, but your quality is also low. If you're in the upper left-hand quadrant, it says that your quality is high, but your costs are also high. If you're in the lower left-hand quadrant, you've got the worst of everything. You've got high costs and low quality. But regardless of where you are, you always want to be thinking, how do you move up and to the right on this chart? If you're in this upper left-hand quadrant, how do you move to the right? That is reduce your costs over time. If you're in this lower right-hand quadrant, how do you move up? That is improve your quality over time. And ultimately, you want to try and push for this outer perimeter. This is the world-class performance curve, very similar to a curve that I showed you a little bit earlier. For service desk like this, the costs are still below average, but the quality is extraordinarily high. For a service desk down here, the costs are extremely low, yet their customer satisfaction is still above average. So think about cost and quality in that sense. They are the yin and yang of IT service and support. They are in constant tension. That tension will never be eliminated. So cost pulls you in the direction, that is low cost, will pull you in the direction of lower quality, just as higher quality will pull you in the direction of higher cost. And the trick is to find an appropriate balance between the two. As I mentioned earlier, most service and support organizations that are optimized end up in this position here where they've struck a reasonable balance and a reasonable trade-off between cost and customer satisfaction. Now, what about the underlying drivers of cost and customer satisfaction? Well, the big driver of cost is agent utilization. Again, this is a labor-intensive function, and so any serious effort to contain cost has got to look at human resource productivity. So as agent utilization increases, we see that cost comes down. Blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a linear regression through that data. The slope here is about 1 to 2, meaning that it takes about a 2 percentage point improvement in utilization to yield a 1 percentage point decrease in cost. The reason for that is that your agent salaries and benefits represent about 50% of the total cost of a support organization. Now, if we look at all personnel, including your indirect personnel such as supervisors, managers, team leads, workforce schedulers, and the like, your personnel expense is about 2/3 of the total. But when we're looking at just agent salaries and benefits, that makes up, on average, about 50% of the total cost of a service desk. So it takes a 2 percentage point improvement in agent utilization to yield a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. Here's how we define utilization. We take inbound contacts, multiply it by inbound handle time. We add to that outbound contacts multiplied by outbound handle time, and we divide it by the number of working minutes per month. In case you've ever wondered, it's about 9,800. That is 9,800 working minutes per month. You'll note here that we don't back out sick days, we don't back out vacation days, idle time, vacation time, holidays. We don't back out training time, idle time where you're waiting for a call to come in and there are no calls. We don't do that, and the reason is that we want to treat everybody in our database in exactly the same way. So regardless of what your vacation policies are, your sick leave policies, your training policies, or anything like that, the denominator is always going to be the same for everybody. It's about 9,800 working minutes per month. And so an example would be, as shown here on page 39, you can go through the math on this example. Inbound contacts, 375 times 10 minutes of inbound handle time, 225 outbound contacts per agent per month times a 5-minute outbound handle time. You run the math, and the number is about 50.4%. And by the way, worldwide, that's about the average agent utilization. And people are sometimes shocked when they see that number, and they sometimes confuse it with occupancy or even schedule adherence. Occupancy can be quite high, yet utilization can be very low. I'll give you an example. Let's say agents come into work one day and they sit at their desks all day long. Their occupancy will be 100%. But if no calls come in, their utilization will be 0%. Occupancy and utilization are very different metrics. You can have high occupancy and low utilization. But low occupancy almost always means low utilization. Low occupancy means that your agents simply aren't logged in, aren't wearing their headsets, don't have, they're not sitting in their seats at the right time. But on average, when we look at service desks worldwide, literally hundreds of them, the average utilization is only about 50%. And when people are shocked and say, well, gee, are they goofing off 50% of the time? The answer is no. But when you factor in, or if we were to factor in vacation days, holidays, sick days, training time, administrative time, idle time where you're ready to take a call but there are no calls, the agents end up only working about 1,050 hours per year. There's 2,080 hours in a typical working year, and an agent is actually in pure customer service mode about half that time, a little more than 1,000 hours per year. Now, if we look at first contact resolution rate versus customer satisfaction, once again, blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a linear regression. As FCR improves, so too does customer satisfaction. The slope here is about 1-to-1. What that means is that it takes a 1 percentage point improvement in FCR to yield an approximate 1 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction. Let's drill down yet further on cost per contact. We've shown that agent utilization is the primary driver, but service levels, it turns out, are a significant driver of agent utilization. Now, what I'm showing on pages 42 and 43 is speed of answer versus cost per contact and call abandonment rate versus cost per contact. Now, if you've ever worked in workforce scheduling, you know that as you go to a more aggressive speed of answer or a more aggressive abandonment rate, you have to staff up in order to keep the speed of answer low and in order to keep the abandonment rate low. That, in turn, drives your cost up. That's why you see on both of these charts, the more aggressive you get on speed of answer and call abandonment rate, the higher your costs go. Now, a lot of organizations don't understand that speed of answer and call abandonment rate do not drive customer satisfaction. So why would you drive to, say, a 2% abandonment rate and a 10-second speed of answer if it does nothing for you but increase your costs? Well, good question. It turns out that there are a significant number of support organizations worldwide that still buy into this dogma that low ASA and low abandonment rate equals high customer satisfaction. Really, nothing could be further from the truth. High FCR equals high customer satisfaction. Low abandonment rate, low speed of answer does not, and here's the data to prove it. On page 44, I'm showing ASA versus customer satisfaction. Page 45 shows call abandonment rate versus customer satisfaction. Now, on page 44, the x-axis here is not seconds. It's not ASA in seconds. It's ASA as a percent of handle time. So if I've got a 10-minute handle time, 10% of that is 1 minute. If I've got a 10-minute or a 5-minute handle time, 10% of that is 30 seconds. And I've regressed that against customer satisfaction. Now, here's what it says, is that as long as your ASA is somewhat below 10% of your total handle time, you're going to be just fine. Which is why if you've got a 30-minute handle time, typically customers are okay with a 3-minute speed of answer. By contrast, if you dial 411, and I don't know if anybody even does that anymore, but a long time ago, if you wanted to get a number from information, you would dial 411, and the speed of answer was about 2 seconds or 1 second. And the reason is that the whole transaction time was only about 20 seconds, and so you expected a 1 or 2 second speed of answer. By contrast, IT service and support end users are smart enough to recognize that in the whole scheme of things, if you look at the total mean time to resolve for any ticket, whether it's a desktop support or the service desk, the answer speed is pretty insignificant. If you're talking about a 10-minute handle time, 1 minute speed of answer is nothing. If you're talking about a 30-minute handle time, a 3-minute speed of answer is nothing. Keep in mind that most end users now have speakerphones. They'll call the number and they will continue to work while they're waiting for you to pick up. Or they will have a chat window open and they'll be chatting with you while they're waiting to, while they're trying to resolve the problem. Or they might even send in an email, in which case ASA and call abandonment rate don't really apply. But here's the shocking conclusion from this, is that going to a more aggressive ASA does nothing for customer satisfaction. Going to a more aggressive abandonment rate does nothing for customer satisfaction. However, if you get too egregious on this, that is, if you get much beyond about 12% ASA as a percentage of handle time, your CSAT will start to drop off. And likewise, if your abandonment rate gets too much above 10%, your customer SAT will start to drop off. So that suggests that there is a sweet spot here. And the sweet spot for ASA as a percent of handle time is about 8%. In other words, the target speed of answer should be around 8% of your total handle time, and the target abandonment rate should be in the range of 6 to 8%. That is where you have optimized the trade-off. You don't run the risk of falling off the right-hand side of the curve and sacrificing customer satisfaction, but you're also not over-investing in speed of answer or call abandonment rate to the point where it's increasing your costs dramatically. Let's switch sides now and talk about, we've already looked at how FCR drives customer satisfaction. Let's look at how training hours drive FCR. Here's new agent training hours versus first contact resolution rate. Not sure why there we go. The red line is the linear regression. The blue diamonds are the data points. As new agent training hours improve, so too does FCR. That's good because FCR in turn drives customer satisfaction. If we look at the amount of annual agent training hours, as the number improves, so too does FCR. The blue diamonds on the y-axis here represent companies that provide no ongoing training for their agents. Okay, so they may have provided 100 or 200 or 300 hours of initial training, but once the agents are let loose and put on the phones or in a chat queue, there's no additional training provided. But as you can see, as the number of training hours improves, so too does first contact resolution rate. Let's look now at how agent satisfaction impacts customer satisfaction, as well as absenteeism and turnover. By the way, the red metrics here represent those that are on the short list. They're also the ones that show up in our scorecard. That's why they're in red. These are the 80-20 rule metrics. That is the less is more metrics, the ones that really matter. Here's how agent satisfaction impacts customer satisfaction. Blue diamonds are data points. Red line is linear regression. As agent satisfaction improves, so too does customer satisfaction. As agent satisfaction improves, turnover goes down. Well, you may know, if you've been in this industry for very long at all, that this is a high turnover business. On average in North America, the turnover in service desks is about 40% per year. I don't know of any other industry where the turnover is that high. That means that your average agent only lasts about 2.5 years. But turnover is very costly. Every time you have to replace an agent, the cost is about $10,000 in North America. That's the cost of finding a person, screening them, recruiting them, training them, and then when they start work, they're not immediately 100% productive. It takes them a while to come down the learning curve. So I think $10,000 to replace an agent is probably a very conservative number. I would guess that it's more like $12,000 or maybe even $15,000 in North America. So reducing turnover is a good thing. One of the ways you can do that is to maintain high levels of agent morale through high levels of agent job satisfaction. I'll talk momentarily about how that's done. Let's finally look at how training hours drive agent job satisfaction. Annual agent training hours on the x-axis, agent job satisfaction on the y-axis. Agents respond to training hours. They like training hours. There are two other key drivers which we'll get into in a minute, career pathing and coaching, but training is one of the primary drivers of agent job satisfaction. So now we can put our build together, starting with our foundation metrics, which are driven respectively by utilization and first contact resolution rate. Those are driven by a tertiary set of metrics, and then you've got agent job satisfaction, which is driven by coaching, career pathing, and training. Okay, now that we understand this cause and effect diagram, that is the linkage between these key performance indicators. We understand how they're interconnected. We understand how the metrics drive each other. We understand what the drivers of cost per contact and customer satisfaction are. We understand what the drivers of agent utilization and FCR are. We understand what the drivers of agent job satisfaction are. This is very powerful because this enables you to pull the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. If you're trying to reduce your cost per contact, you've got to look at agent utilization. If you're trying to improve your customer satisfaction, you've got to look at first contact resolution rate first, and secondarily, you've got to look at agent job satisfaction because those are the big levers that you have at your disposal to drive those metrics to a higher level. So we're back now at our benchmarking data. Remember, high cost, low customer satisfaction. Well, we know that costs are high when agent utilization is low. So let's look at agent utilization. 46.7% compared to 53.1% for the peer group. Okay, we've got our first smoking gun, low agent utilization. What are the drivers of low utilization? Oftentimes they're service levels that are too aggressive. So we see that the speed of answer here is 18 seconds compared to 45 seconds for the peer group. The abandonment rate is 2.9% compared to 8.1% for the peer group. Now, when I asked this organization, why do you have an 18-second speed of answer and a 2.9% abandonment rate, the answer, and I kid you not, was the CIO told us to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. Okay, that is a classic example of an individual that doesn't understand what drives customer satisfaction. That person is wrongfully assuming that aggressive service levels equal good customer satisfaction. But in this case, and in many other cases, you can see that it clearly doesn't. The customer stat is only 63% compared to 79% for the peer group. So the diagnosis here was pretty straightforward. They were overstaffed so that they could hit these aggressive service levels. Remember that chart that I showed you, which, you know, cost goes up when your ASA goes down, cost goes up when your abandonment rate goes down. This support desk was overstaffed. They had about 5 too many FTEs, full-time equivalent headcount, just so they could meet these service levels. Well, their attrition was about 30% per year. It was actually better than this peer group. Peer group was at 32% attrition per year, 32% turnover per year compared to 29% for the peer group. Our advice to them was you need to attrit, you need to lose about 5 FTEs. You can do so through turnover, just don't backfill, you know, the next 5 people that leave. What's going to happen is that your ASA will drift up, your abandonment rate will drift up, but your utilization will increase and your cost per contact will come down. And sure enough, within about 90 days, or actually it was about 120 days, all of those things had happened. They dropped their head count. They saw their ASA go to about 30 seconds, I believe it was, maybe 40 seconds. Their abandonment rate went up to about 6%. Their utilization went to almost 55%, and their cost per contact went to about $21. Pretty straightforward stuff. Once you understand how these KPIs are interconnected and interrelated, it's pretty easy to diagnose performance gaps and do something about it. The second big gap was in customer satisfaction. We know from what we've just been through that FCR is the biggest single driver of customer satisfaction, so let's look at that. The first contact resolution rate is 51.3%. The peer group average was at 71.2%. Okay, there's our smoking gun behind the red flag being low CSAT, the smoking gun being first contact resolution rate is low. What are some of the big drivers of FCR? Well, training hours is a big one, so let's look at training hours. New agent training hours, 36 hours compared to almost 80 hours for the peer group. Annually, their agents get 12 hours of training versus 34 hours for the peer group. So again, the diagnosis here was pretty straightforward, and the long story was the same as the short story, which is that you need to invest in training, and specifically you need to invest in training around the importance of first contact resolution rate. Now, there are other things that can improve your FCR. For example, a good knowledge management tool can improve FCR. Experienced agents can improve your FCR, and also a remote diagnostic tool. You've heard the names before, names like BombGar and LogMeIn and GoToAssist. Those are tools that enable you to improve your first contact resolution rate. But in this particular case, training was a big lever that they had at their disposal, and by increasing the training hours for both new agents, and they weren't hiring at this time, so they invested in training for their existing agents, and specifically training around the importance of FCR and techniques for improving first contact resolution rate. Again, within a relatively short period of time, their FCR got up to about 75%, and their customer satisfaction, which had been 63%, approached within 6 months, it got up to about 85%. So once you understand how these KPIs are interconnected and interrelated, which KPIs drive which other KPIs, you have an enormous amount of power to diagnose performance gaps within your organization, but more importantly, you have an enormous opportunity to do something about it. That is, act on those performance gaps with the knowledge of how these KPIs affect each other. Okay, I'm going to skip this Q&A session because we're about 10 minutes away from wrapping up here. And at the conclusion of today's webcast, I'm going to answer all of the questions that you have, and I will stay on the call as long as needed. So you can type in as many questions as you have, and I won't go away until I've answered all of the questions. But because we're running a little bit short on time right now, I'm going to skip this Q&A session. And we're going to get right into the third component of our Service Desk Best Practices model, and this is on human resource management, which is all about managing human resources over their life cycle. Now, what I've shown here on page 58 is a little bit of a cheat sheet. I've listed down the left-hand side some of the more well-known best practices in human resource management. This is not a complete list, but it's some that you would think of intuitively. The left-hand side is kind of a shorthand. The left column is a shorthand for the best practice. The second column is more of an explanation of the best practice. And then in the upper right, I've got a list of key performance indicators. I call them the affected KPIs. And I've shown cost per contact, customer satisfaction, utilization, first call resolution rate, call quality, handle time, and turnover. At the intersection of these affected KPIs and any given best practice, you're going to see a cell. The cell will either be white, light blue, or dark blue. If the cell is white, it means that the best practice and the affected KPI have little or no cause-effect relationship. If there's a light blue cell, it means that the affected KPI and the best practice have a weak cause and effect relationship. And if there's a dark blue cell, it means that the affected KPI and the best practice have a strong cause and effect relationship. So per our case study that we just went through, invest in training to improve the first contact resolution rate. Here, if we look at first call resolution rate, we look at training, we look at the intersection, there's a dark blue cell. What that says is that you can substantially improve your first contact resolution rate through training. No surprise there. I think most people would probably figure that out on their own. Not all of these are quite as intuitive, though. When you establish a performance standard, something as simple as saying, okay, our standard for FCR is 80%, or our standard for FCR is 75%, oftentimes simply establishing a standard can go a long ways towards improving performance in a given area. So what this chart allows you to do, at least for human resource management, is look at the affected KPIs. Let's say you do a benchmark and you find that there's a gap in customer satisfaction. You see that one of the tools that you have to improve CSAT would be training. If you find that there's a gap in utilization, oftentimes just establishing a performance target will improve utilization. If you find that there's a gap in turnover, well, the way you recruit, the way you train, whether or not you have a bona fide career path, whether or not you have real retention strategies in place, all of those will impact the turnover that you experience in your support organization. So again, this is a little bit of a cheat sheet to be used at the conclusion of a benchmark. When you identify a performance gap in any one of these areas, you can tie it back to a best practice that either needs to be adopted, improved, revised, modified, but process drives performance. So the intersection here is no surprise. Performance listed by these columns on the right-hand side, these 8 columns on the right, and performance or process listed, shown on these rows here. So process drives performance. These specific best practices around human resource management can go a long ways towards closing gaps in any one of the KPIs that are shown up here. Now, I've taken the chart that we just looked at a few moments ago. It was that KPI build to make a point about agent job satisfaction. Remember, agent job satisfaction was on the short list of metrics that you ought to be tracking. It has a secondary effect, as you can see from this chart, on many other metrics. And there's a perception in this industry that job satisfaction and hence morale is just low. And it is true that agent morale is at epidemically low levels throughout this industry. That's why the turnover is so high. That's why you have 40% turnover in this industry. And a lot of managers simply throw out their arms, a lot of supervisors throw out their arms and say, there's nothing we can do about it. This is just a burnout job because these people are taking calls all day long, call after call after call. It's like a 911 center for people with IT problems, and it really is. It's a stressful job, and not everybody can do it well. However, I disagree with those individuals that don't think you can do anything about agent morale or agent job satisfaction. The two are proxies for each other. If job satisfaction is high, morale will be good. Job satisfaction is low, morale will not be good. It can be managed, though. We've already shown how it can be managed through training hours. I showed you that cause-effect diagram right here. Agent training hours versus agent job satisfaction. The more training the agents get, the more satisfied they are. So you have control there. Also, if you have a formal career path, and I'll show this to you in just a minute, that improves agent job satisfaction. And the quality and the amount of coaching that the agents get will drive agent job satisfaction and hence morale within the organization. And this is worth managing proactively. In fact, when I do a benchmark or an assessment for an organization, one of the first things I ask is, how's the morale, and can you demonstrate the morale? Are you actually tracking agent job satisfaction? Because I don't care if the manager of that support organization knows the difference between an ACD and an abandoned call. What I do care about is whether or not that manager can maintain a high level of morale within the organization. Because if the manager can maintain good morale in service and support, almost everything else takes care of itself. That sounds like a very bold statement, but it's very true. If we regress agent job satisfaction against a whole host of other metrics, from customer satisfaction to cost per contact, we find that agent job satisfaction is positively correlated with everything that you want it to be positively correlated to. So it is worth managing this actively. Here's annual agent training hours versus agent job satisfaction. As the number of training hours increases, so too does agent job satisfaction. And this chart, page 61, shows agent job satisfaction with and without a career path. The blue diamonds represent agent satisfaction when there is a formal career path. The fuchsia-colored squares represent agent job satisfaction when there's no career path. With a career path, average job satisfaction is about 81%. Without a career path, average job satisfaction about 72%. So that's backing this up right here. Career path, training hours, both have a strong impact on agent job satisfaction. The third thing that drives job satisfaction is the amount and quality of training or coaching that they receive. Now, inasmuch as accountability is important at an individual level within an organization, one way that you can drive accountability down to the individual agent level is to repurpose the scorecard that I showed you earlier and use the scorecard as an agent scorecard. Mechanically, this works exactly the same way. The metrics are a little bit different. We're looking at inbound contacts handled per agent per month. That's the productivity metric. We're looking at customer satisfaction. This assumes that you can tie back any individual survey to the agent who handled that transaction. We look at the utilization of that agent. We look at that agent's FCR. And then we look at some soft metrics like teamwork and initiative and mentoring. Now, even these soft metrics can be quantified. We just put them on a scale of 1 to 5. So a 5 says you do a great job of teamwork. A 1 says you're not so good in teamwork. Same thing with initiative and mentoring. You can actually quantify these subjective factors. Now, what this allows you to do is update on a monthly basis every agent's scorecard and have a very frank discussion with that agent about their strengths and weaknesses. You can see this agent has a score of 100 on teamwork. They're doing a great job there. They have a score of 100 on mentoring. They're doing a great job there. But they've got a weak score on customer satisfaction. Their customer stat is only 70%, so they're much closer to the worst end of the spectrum than they are the best end of the spectrum. So what we've done is we have objectified what is otherwise a very subjective process. You've all been on both the giving end and the receiving end of these assessments. And typically, it's very dissatisfying for both the deliverer of the feedback as well as the recipient of the feedback because it tends to be squishy, like, hey, you're doing a good job, keep it up, or I think you could improve a little bit, your attitude's not great, you could show up on time a little bit more often, things like that. They tend to be platitudes that aren't very easy to act upon. However, by putting in every individual agent's performance into a scorecard like this and then scheduling regular feedback sessions, you can deliver actionable feedback in each of the areas that you're measuring on this particular scorecard. So what we're doing is we're objectifying what is otherwise a very subjective process of delivering feedback. Most of our clients now go a step further, and they will also publish the results on a monthly basis of everybody's score. Now, everybody has a number. You don't want to embarrass people by putting their name here on the chart, but you do want agent number 27 to understand that they placed 17th that month. You want agent number 14 to understand that they placed 5th that month, and agent number 11 to know that they were the top performer that month. And what this does is it helps encourage agents to improve their performance. For those that really understand and want to do well in this profession, they're going to get motivated to improve their score month over month over month. And for those that just consistently can't seem to get a good score, they may decide, you know, this job just isn't for me, and they may self-attrit out, which isn't a bad thing. So the agent scorecard can also be used not only to deliver very objective feedback, but it can be used to rank the agents within a support organization and help them understand how they compare to their peers that are delivering the same services day in and day out. For those that have real concern, for those that are motivated and dedicated to what they're doing, this is going to be an incentive for them to perform better. For those that may be in the wrong position for whatever reason, just don't have the aptitude or the enthusiasm for this job, it's probably going to encourage them to make a decision to leave the organization, which, as I mentioned earlier, may not be a bad thing for your weaker performers. Final section of our best practices model is going to address marketing. This is really about actively managing stakeholder perceptions. And what I want to introduce to you first here is a two-dimensional chart that shows perceived versus actual value. The x-axis here shows the actual value being delivered by a support organization, higher value on the right, lower value on the left. The x-axis, the y-axis shows the perceived value. Higher up is higher value, lower is lower value. Now the only locus of points that makes any sense here is this diagonal line, because this is the line where the perceived value and the actual value are the same thing. So if you're delivering poor value and the perception is that you're delivering poor value, well, at least the perception is fair. And if you're delivering high value and the perception is that you're delivering high value, well, again, the perception is fair. But it doesn't often happen that way. More often than not, service and support organizations end up in this lower right-hand corner, where the value they're delivering is good, but the perception of that value is not so good. So this is a common position, but it's a dangerous position to be in. That's why it's red down here. Red is danger, green is good. The reason it's dangerous is because decisions are based not on reality, but on perception. And if the perception is that service and support is not doing a very good job, then decisions will be made accordingly. It might be a decision not to fund additional headcount. It might be a decision to outsource that's not justified. It might be a decision to insource that's not justified. It might be a decision to not invest in a particular technology, but it can only lead to bad things in the long run if the perception of value is different than the actual value. And by the way, this never works to your favor. I've yet to see an organization that operates up here in this green area where they're not doing so hot, but everybody thinks they're doing a great job. It just doesn't work that way. And the reason this gap opens up between perception and reality is because when individuals have a poor experience with service and support, they tend to tell 10, 12, 15 people. By contrast, when they have a great experience, they don't tell anybody. And so over time, even though you personally may have had great experiences with the service desk, you don't tell anybody, but what you hear, the buzz around the office is, oh, gee, Mary called the service desk today and they never got back to her, or Joe called them last week and they were supposed to update Microsoft Outlook for him and they never did it, or they screwed it up so badly that he had to completely re-image his computer. What you hear are the negative things, because those are the things that get repeated. You don't hear the positive anecdotes because those don't get repeated. And so over time, even though your personal experiences may have been quite good with IT service and support, it's likely, if you're not managing your message proactively, that you're going to end up in this dangerous spot down here where the actual value you deliver may be quite good, but the perception of that value is not good. And so what we want to do is manage our brand. We want to close this gap between perception and reality. How do you do it? Well, we've developed a 5W model. We actually have a half-day workshop on this, but I'm going to give you the 2-minute version here. The 5 Ws are defining who the stakeholders are, defining what your key messages to those stakeholders are going to be, defining when and how often you communicate those messages to the stakeholders, defining how you reach them, what are the channels, and then why are we doing this? Well, that's a little bit of a rhetorical question, but I want to close with an answer to this question, why it's so important to manage the message. Now, the 5 Ws can be displayed as I've shown here on page 70. We've got timing, we've got the messages, and we've got the channels. In terms of timing, the more frequently you can reach out to your stakeholders, the better. At new employee orientation, there should be a brief module on the service desk. Whenever a user logs in, there should be a little pop-up that says click here to chat or click here to call the support desk, and it might even show what the hours of operation are. During IT training sessions, I'm not talking about service desk training, I'm talking about IT training, there should be a module on how to effectively use the service desk. During an incident itself, you have an opportunity to communicate expectations, because even if you move heaven and earth to resolve an end user's problem within, say, I'll make up a number, 6 hours, if they were expecting a 1-hour resolution or a first contact resolution, they're going to be disappointed. So during the incident, it's important to manage their expectations. If there's bad news to be had, i.e. it's going to take a full day or 2 days, get it out right up front. Don't let it drip, drip, drip and create anger and let that anger fester with your end users. And then finally, at scheduled sessions, much like what I'm doing right here, many of our clients now hold weekly or monthly go-to-meeting sessions where they will actually do a little half-hour presentation on the service desk. One presentation might be on, here are the results of our recent customer satisfaction survey. The next week or the next month, it might be on, hey, we just adopted this new tool, BombGuard, that allows us to do remote diagnostic type work. The next month, it might be on, hey, we'd like to tell you about some of the services that we offer at the service desk and so on. The messages, well, you want to communicate multiple messages, including the services you offer, key initiatives underway, your performance, the good, bad, and the ugly. Be honest about it, communicate it. FAQs that your end users can access, frequently asked questions that they can access on the intranet to solve their own problems, and then brag a little. You've had success in whatever it might be, your recent customer sat survey, the deployment of a new tool, improving your first contact or first level resolution rate, let the stakeholders know. Finally, in terms of channels, use every channel available. At login, through quarterly or monthly newsletters, online reference guides, asset tags that will have the phone number and the URL of the service desk on it, through end user surveys, and then user liaisons. These are individuals that are designated within end user groups like human resources or sales or manufacturing or accounting or finance. They are there to be your eyes and ears for the end users, and they communicate back to the service desk what the end users are thinking, and you in turn in the service desk can communicate back to those end users key messages that need to be communicated back to those end users. So why are we doing this? That was a rhetorical question at the end of the 5 W's. Well, because expectations not set are expectations not met. And so it's important to proactively manage those expectations so that we can close this perception gap and eliminate the problem of decisions being based on perception and not reality. And it was more than a dozen years ago that one of my clients sent this comic to me, and it reads, "Delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to?" And the reason is this, and I presented this chart once already. The reason is that service and support is the gateway to all of IT. And the quality of interactions that the end users have at this interface has far-reaching implications for their level of satisfaction with all of IT. So you that work in service and support have a special opportunity as well as a special responsibility to ensure that every transaction does add value, every transaction is consistent with industry best practices, so that over time, end users end up developing a positive view, not just of service and support, but of all IT. Now for CIOs and CTOs and other directors and managers within IT, I think the message from this is clear. The message is you should be investing not just the appropriate level of people and dollars and technology in IT service and support, but you should be investing your personal time and attention. If you can't get down there once a week to spend an hour or two with service and support, at least schedule a conference call with them, or do a Skype session or a chat session with them. Let them know that you care. Let them know that you realize that service and support is the gateway to IT for all of end users, and let them know that you understand that as service and support goes, so too goes all of IT. This is a proxy for your effectiveness, and I'm talking directly now to the CIOs and the CTOs that are on this particular call. Service and support is a reflection of how good a job you personally are doing. So my advice is invest, again, not only dollars, headcount, and technology, but also invest your personal time and attention to ensure that those that work in IT service and support know that your level of commitment to service and support is there to ensure that end users have a consistently high-quality experience. So to summarize on marketing, managing this gap between perception and reality, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. The average support organization doesn't do much in this area, but those that do spend less than 2% of their total resources on what I call marketing. It's critically important because the success of your service desk depends as much on your image as it does on your actual performance. The benefits include customer loyalty and positive word-of-mouth referrals, credibility, which leverages your ability to get things done, a positive image for all of IT, and high levels of customer satisfaction. So I want to close with a few remarks about how you can put into action some of what you've learned here today. We've gone through a four-part model that addresses IT service and support strategy, performance measurement and management, human resource management, and stakeholder communication. Strategy is about creating economic value by being proactive and preventive, by understanding TCO, emphasizing first-level resolution, and creating and demonstrating economic value. Performance measurement is about using KPIs holistically. A small number of KPIs is better, less is more. You should have a balanced scorecard. You should be benchmarking once a year, and you need to understand the cause and effect relationships of the most important key performance indicators. When it comes to human resource management, investing in agent training and development is not just motherhood and apple pie. It has a real payoff in terms of improved agent job satisfaction, reduced turnover, reduced absenteeism, improved customer satisfaction, lower turnover, lower absenteeism. Career pathing, coaching and feedback, and formal retention strategies, all of these are critical success factors in managing human resources over the course of their life cycle. And marketing, it's about perception versus reality. View the service desk as the key and single most important driver of IT perceptions, and recognize how value is created and be willing to communicate value. That, again, increases your credibility and it improves your ability to get things done. So the bottom line on service desk best practices is that the service desk is now being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise, one that can reduce the overall cost of IT and dramatically improve the productivity of end users and drive high levels of customer satisfaction for all of IT. Strategic service desks have a number of success factors in common. They're well integrated into the overall IT value chain. In other words, they're not considered some ancillary support function. They understand the economics of service desk TCO. They have active efforts to maximize FCR, which drives customer sat, and FLR, which helps reduce total cost of ownership. They use performance metrics diagnostically, and they benchmark once a year. They invest in agent training, coaching, and career pathing. They have active internal marketing efforts, and they aggressively promote and communicate the economic value that they create within the enterprise. Now in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up, that have been typed into the dialog box, and conduct a Q&A session. But before I do the Q&A, I just want to make a few closing remarks. Now, there's a number of things that you can do almost immediately to leverage some of the insights that you've gained here today. First, I would encourage all of you to take a look around our new website at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. I would also suggest that you connect with MetricNet on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that call center and IT support professionals will find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups, as well as a LinkedIn company page. We also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. In the copy of the presentation itself, I've provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for our upcoming webcast. In September, we're going to be covering service desk KPIs. In October, we're going to be looking at best practices in desktop support. And in November, we'll be looking at call center best practices. Please feel free to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, and magazine articles on best practices in IT service and support. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are 3 ways that you can complete an IT service and support benchmark with MetricNet. We have our peer group benchmarks, which are the most diagnostic and comprehensive. We have our industry benchmarks, which can be downloaded directly from our website. And for those that want to do it yourself, you can purchase a benchmarking data file and do your own benchmarking analysis. You can reach MetricNet at this phone number in the United States, 703-992-7559. If you're interested in a quote for a benchmark or MetricNet's recently introduced one-year path to world-class performance, you can request a quote directly on our website, or you can email us at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I'll be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let's take a look at the questions that we have queued up. Okay, let's see. From Kevin, what is IVR? IVR is interactive voice response. That is, when you dial into the service desk, you will sometimes be prompted, press 1. If you have a hardware question, press 2. If you have a software question, so an IVR, interactive voice response, is what that means. Question from Lucas, what is the difference between a service desk and desktop support? Service desk provides support remotely, either through a chat or an email or a voice call. Desktop support requires hands-on assistance at the user's device. So it's called desktop support. It doesn't always happen at the desktop, but it does require hands-on support of a technician, perhaps for connectivity issues, or to do a physical move add change, or to replace a broken piece of hardware, as an example. So desktop support requires the physical presence of a technician. Service desk support is delivered remotely. Okay, from Adam, will the deck be available after the call? The answer is yes. If you fill out the survey that pops up when you exit the webcast, we'll send you a copy of the deck. From Lucas, is extensive software testing on a help desk of 10 people a common practice? Currently, our company has us test new updates with our 5 different software packages. I'm not sure what software you're talking about, Lucas. Perhaps you can elaborate on this question. I assume you're talking about enterprise software that your organization uses. And the question is it common for you to test that? And I'm wondering if this is commercial software that you actually sell to your customers. Because if that's the case, i.e. you're a company that sells software to consumers or to businesses, it's not unusual for the service desk to run that software through its paces. However, if you're talking about an internal support organization and your applications group asks you to test software before they release it, that's highly unusual. So it really depends upon whether or not you're supporting consumers or businesses external to your company, in which case testing the software is pretty common. If you're supporting internal users, testing the software is quite uncommon. Okay, from Brian, does a customer define the metric weighting in aggregate balance scorecard, or are these MetricNet recommended weightings that can be benchmarked across other customers? Brian, it's really up to you. You create the scorecard for your own purposes, and you can certainly change the weightings if you would like to do so. In fact, if you go to MetricNet's website, we do have there's a section in our library where you can download the scorecard, and you can change the weightings any way you'd like to. So there are no standard weightings, but I would encourage you to overweight cost and customer satisfaction, because those are the 2 foundation metrics. As you know, in our sample scorecard, they received 25% each. The next 2 metrics were utilization and first contact resolution rate. Those metrics received 15% each. And then the last 2 metrics got 10% each, and they were agent job satisfaction and average speed of answer. You can swap out the metrics. You can put different metrics in. You can put more or fewer metrics in, and you can weight them differently. So you've got a lot of flexibility on that scorecard, depending upon how you want to deploy it. Okay, from Ryan, if downtime is after hours and does not affect any users' customers, is it considered downtime? It depends upon what you're talking about as far as downtime. If it's network downtime, well, actually it doesn't. I mean, if it's not affecting any users, it may be downtime, but if users are unaffected, it's obviously less impactful than if many users are affected. That doesn't happen very often, though. When you've got downtime, whether it's network downtime or application downtime or any other kind of downtime, it's extremely rare that you don't have some users that are affected. So that the scenario that you're creating here, after hours downtime, I'm having a hard time coming up with a scenario where you don't have at least some users or customers who are affected by that. It's still downtime, but it clearly has less of an impact if it does happen after hours. And if it really doesn't impact end users or customers, then it's still downtime. It's just not affecting them. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's not downtime because it's not affecting them. It's just downtime that doesn't affect them as much because it happens to have occurred during off hours. From Timothy, wondering if they can get a recording of the presentation. The answer is yes. We will be sending an email to everybody who registered for today's webcast, and in that email there will be a link that gets you to a recording of the webcast, so you will have access to that. Okay, from Brian, what is the difference between inbound and outbound contacts per agent? Let's say that a service desk has 10 agents and that they handle 5,000 well, that's too much. 2,500 inbound contacts per month and 5,000 outbound contacts per month. That's not unusual. Okay, each agent is going to be handling, on average, about 250 inbound and about 500 outbound contacts per month. So you simply look at the total inbound and the total outbound, and you divide it by the number of agents, and that's going to tell you the average number of inbound contacts handled per agent per month and the average number of outbound contacts. Now, inbound and outbound includes all channels. It's going to include live voice calls. It's going to include email. It's going to include chat. It's going to include web tickets. So you're looking at all channels, but that's how that's defined. Okay, should the cost of the service desk software be included in the cost metrics? The answer is yes. You do pay licensing fees for service desk software. That should be included in the total cost when you're coming up with cost per contact. Okay, question from Karen. Can you recommend a best practice in obtaining quality benchmark information? Yeah, that answer is pretty obvious, I think. Okay, from Lucas, how much does it cost for you to do a benchmark on a company? It really depends upon the level of depth that you're looking at, Lucas, and how many key performance indicators you're interested in including in your benchmark, and whether or not you're doing a one-off benchmark or what we would call the one-year path to world-class performance, which includes a benchmark and an ROI calculation. Then it includes 6 to 9 months of implementation for implementing recommendations that come out of the first benchmark, and then it concludes with a second benchmark and ROI calculation. So it really depends upon the depth and the number of KPIs that you want in that benchmark, Lucas. What I would suggest is that you send us an email at info@metricnet.com, and we can set up a time to discuss the options with you. Okay, from Lauren, how do you measure customer satisfaction? We have a survey and ask yes/no questions to get a percent. Is that the percent you are using to measure customer satisfaction, or should we also take into consideration the non-responses? Well, the non-responses should not be taken into consideration because that's a null data point. It doesn't tell you anything. But there are as many different ways to survey customers as there are organizations. So you're asking a question, that the answer could take several hours, actually. There are different channels. You can send email surveys. You can have flash surveys that occur right at the end of a transaction where you ask the user to stay on the phone and press a few buttons based upon questions you ask, such as, were you satisfied with the quality of the response? Were you satisfied with the wait time? Were you satisfied with the professionalism of the agent? And you push buttons in order to answer those questions. Those flash surveys have the highest response rate, but they are also, and it's also the least costly, but it also gives you the least insight. The most costly, but also the most insightful customer surveys are when you do the live interviews. You call the customer up and you ask them a series of questions. Some combination of those three, email surveys, flash surveys, and then interview surveys, that is where you call the customer directly. Some combination of those three is what we typically like to see because each have their pros and cons. So there are the channels that you use to survey your customers, and then there's the survey vehicle itself. Typically that survey should be short, no more than 5 questions. Generally, you want to ask each question on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 says you strongly disagree, 5 says you strongly agree, and then the questions would say things like, the service desk answered, gave you a prompt reply to your service request. 1 says, no, I disagree, 5 says, yes, I strongly agree. The second statement might be that the service desk resolved your issue to your, did a good job resolving your issue. Again, 1 says, I disagree, 5 says, I agree. A scale of 1 to 5 is most common. It's also the easiest to work with. So I'm trying to give you just off the top of my head here, Lauren, what some of the best practices are. But the whole issue of customer surveying is one that, again, it would take me several hours to address it in depth. But the key issues are which channels. Ideally, you want a mix of channels. Secondly, what's the survey vehicle? You want a mix of questions. Keep it short, measure it on a scale of 1 to 5, and then give each person an opportunity. You can't do this on a flash survey on the phone, but you can in an email survey or in an interview survey. Give the respondent an opportunity to tell you what's on their mind. So in addition to just the questions you ask them, just ask them to tell you anything else that they think is important for the interaction that they've had. Okay, from Kaomi, I think that's the name. I apologize if I've mispronounced that. If using a service desk outsourcer and we have little or no control over career, coaching, and training, how do we ensure that agent satisfaction is high? The first thing you do is you insist that the outsourcer measure agent satisfaction and report on it monthly. The second thing you do is you ask them to communicate to you what career path options their agents are given, what level of coaching and frequency of coaching, and what kind of training. You're the buyer. Exercise some buyer power. The idea that you're, kind of dependent upon the reports they give you, and if they don't want to, survey their agents, or you're the buyer. You tell them what to do. And so if you want to know what they're doing in career pathing, coaching, and training, tell them you need to know, and you want reports. And if you want to know what the agent job satisfaction is, ask them. And if they're not measuring it, tell them they got to start measuring it and providing you with monthly updates. So you're in the driver's seat here. Too often, unfortunately, we find that customers don't realize they're in the driver's seat when it comes to an outsourcing relationship. But you should be telling your outsourcer that this is the kind of information that you want. Okay, let's see. From Paul. Hi, Jeff. How do you ensure that a calculation method of a metric, for example, FCR, customer satisfaction, is being done the same way by all organizations in your database? For customer satisfaction, we don't. We simply take, Paul, the customer sat data that a company will provide us. Now, when we do benchmarks, there are some benchmarks where our clients ask us to do a customer satisfaction survey, which we can do and we will do. When we do that, we know that it's done in an unbiased way and we know that we have accurate information. However, when companies simply provide us with their CSAT information, there's a lot of variance, there's a lot of variability, wide standard deviation in that number, in part because of what you're alluding to, which is that almost no two organizations measure customer satisfaction in exactly the same way. They don't use the same questions, they don't use the same rating scale, they don't use the same delivery channels, and so it's very difficult to get apples and apples when you're comparing CSAT from one organization to another. However, you can get directional accuracy, and that's about the best you can do when we're using customer satisfaction data reported by our clients and it goes into our database. We assume that it's directionally accurate without a whole lot of precision. Okay, question from Cindy. What are the 3 to 5 metrics to measure total contact ownership? TCO, I think, is what you're talking about, Cindy. I would look at, first of all, first level resolution rate, and I spoke about that in the presentation. And then at desktop support, I would look at percent resolved level 1 capable. Not that many desktop support organizations track it, but if you have those 2 metrics, percent resolved level 1 capable and first level resolution rate at level 1 in the service desk, those 2 are going to give you a very good idea of how close you're coming to minimizing your total cost of ownership. As I mentioned very early on in today's presentation, the average percent resolved level 1 capable is more than 20%. It's a big number, which says that more than 20% of the tickets being resolved at desktop support could have and should have been resolved at level 1. And even those that are really good about minimizing those defects, that is tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1, the number is only about 5%. So it's impossible to eliminate those defects in their entirety, but you can certainly get them down from the industry average level of 20 or 25%. Okay, so Lucas elaborated on an earlier question. It's commercial software that we sell and add on to QuickBooks. I manage the help desk, and we seem to have problems with live answer calls versus the extra things, including testing. And they ask of the help desk. Okay, so what they're asking you to do, Lucas, that is test the software that is used by both consumers and businesses. If it's QuickBooks, that's usually going to be businesses as opposed to, the other Intuit products that are out there, which are consumer-based products. But asking you to test that software before it goes out is pretty common. But it's important that they also give you the resources to do it, meaning that you need to have the headcount to test software in addition to answer business calls that come in about the QuickBooks add-on that you have. If they're not giving you the resources to test the software, it's a bad proposition. It's a bad situation that you're in. So the fact that they're asking you to do it is not unusual. The question is, are they giving you the resources? Specifically, are they giving you the headcount that allows you to do it? Okay, question from Cindy. I do mean contact, not cost. Total contact ownership. What are the key metrics? I'm not sure what you're asking, Cindy. Is it total cost of ownership, or are you talking about cost per contact? Could you just elaborate for me, because it's still not clear to me what you're asking for here. Question from Lauren. How do you measure level 1 capable? Just a field on a ticket? Any requirements before they say yes, level 1 capable? A couple of things here. When a ticket is resolved by anything other than level 1, there should be a box in the ticket that can be checked that would say level 1 resolvable. Now, if everybody reported that accurately, that would be easy. Desktop support or level 3 IT or field support could just check a box that says level 1 resolvable, and you're done. But the reality is you have to audit tickets, not all of them, but a cross-section of tickets. Let's say you handle 1,000 tickets a month. You want to audit probably about 10% of those. At least in the early months, you're going to find that there's a big disparity between tickets that could have been resolved at level 1 and the ones that were designated as resolvable at level 1. So there needs to be an audit function feature, if you will, to ensure that those that are designating tickets resolvable at level 1, that they really are resolvable at level 1. Likewise, you need to be sampling tickets that were not designated as resolvable at level 1, because there's a little bit of a conflict of interest here with desktop support. If I'm a desktop support tech and I'm getting some easy tickets that could be resolved at level 1, I kind of want to keep them because they're so easy to resolve, and it makes my life a little bit easier. I don't want to designate those as level 1 resolvable, because if they start getting pushed back down to level 1, then my workload becomes more difficult, meaning that the tickets that are left over are more difficult. So in addition to having a checkbox on the trouble ticket that says level 1 resolvable, you do need to have an audit function. Usually after a few monthly audits, 3 or 4 monthly audits, the metric will equalize, meaning that you will find that the metric, there's no bias in it, that there aren't an inordinate number of people designating tickets as level 1 resolvable when they're not, and vice versa. There aren't an inordinate number of tickets that are not designated level 1 resolvable when they are in fact level 1 resolvable. But you do have to have that audit function at least in the first few months after you adopt that checkbox saying level 1 resolvable in order to ensure that the data is being reported accurately. Okay, quite a few of you remained on to the very end here. I'll stay on for a few seconds. If you've got any questions, please type them in. Otherwise, we'll conclude our webcast. Okay, one last question. Total contact ownership. Establishing accountability for all interactions throughout the life cycle of the record, from the time the record ticket is created to the time the record is closed. Okay, so you're talking about the total cost of a ticket. So that would include, Cindy, the cost of level 1 plus any N-level costs. Now, tracking the cost of a ticket at level 1 and desktop support, that's pretty common. But tracking the cost of a ticket when it gets beyond that is fairly uncommon, because most organizations are not set up to have their application people, their NOC people, their data center people keep track of the time that they spend resolving end user tickets, end user trouble tickets, if you will, or incidents. So tracking cost at level 1 in desktop support, yes, that's very, very common. But tracking beyond that, pretty uncommon. We had to go to great lengths to get the data that was shown on that diagram, the shift left diagram that showed the average cost per ticket when it gets pushed to level 3 IT support, when it gets pushed out to vendor support and field support. Most organizations just don't track those metrics. And that's scary. It's insidious, because you might have all sorts of costs being incurred by N level within IT that aren't being tracked. If you've got people working in applications or the data center or the NOC, and they're spending a lot of time on service and support, but they're not tracking that time and hence the cost, that's a hidden cost that can be pretty substantial for an organization. So when you talk about total contact ownership, in the industry it tends to be pretty good at level 1 in desktop support, but most organizations lose track of their time and hence costs when it gets beyond desktop support. So I hope that was helpful. All right, we're at the end of our session. I once again want to thank all of you for participating in today's webcast. I do hope that you found it to be informative and insightful. As I've mentioned on a number of occasions, please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Thank you once again. Thank you for joining our webcast. Goodbye now.